Well, looks what a mysterious thing to have. As soon as we started discussing, let's see here. Let's do this. Excellent. Do that. Do that. We'll put this over here so I could see if YouTube decides to get a little interesting again. So, good. So you saw that, audience? Wasn't that fascinating? Once we went through the history of anti-fascism here in the United States. Once I started to read what was some controversial subjects of the present, suddenly, magically, the stream went down. So let's see what happens. And also tell me if I'm, 5x5, if you're getting all this clearly, if it's all coming through okay. All of a sudden I had to find stream keys and had to have software. Like all of a sudden, this is not working. Fancy that. Okay. So once again, we had gone over the history of how the United States, all right, thank you very much. We had gone through the history of how the United States had hidden Ukrainian and Belarusian Nazis, and that Congress had attempted to find out about it, and that the FBI, the CIA, Immigration Naturalization Services, and other organizations in the United States government were suppressing all of this. So now that we've had all fascinating coinky-dink occur, let's start over again with what's been going on lately in this field. An article by Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. I'll be making sure to edit this so that all the links are in there so that you can look through all of this yourself. Not only are white supremacists across this flocking to Ukraine to learn from the combat experience of their fascist brothers in arms, they are doing so openly under the nose of shrugging law enforcement, chronicling their experiences on social. It's originally appeared at Mint Press. I'm reading it from thegrayzone.com. Uh-oh, suddenly the connection's unstable. Really? Okay. Last month, an unsealed FBI indictment of 4 American white supremacists from the Rise Above movement declared officially incorporated into the country's National Guard. The training took place after the white supremacist gang participated in violent riots in Huntington. Article because I want to give you really from somebody who's obviously of left leaning and was really is fundamentally taking the efforts by Antifa as just people, good citizens standing up to horrible people. So that everybody's getting that I'm trying to give some balance here. Trying to be, fair and objective. The indictment stated that the Azov Battalion is believed to have participated in training and radicalizing United States-based white supremacy organizations. After a wave of racist violence across America that culminated in the massacre of 12 Jewish worshippers at a Pittsburgh synagogue, the revelation that white supremacists have been traveling abroad for training and ideological indoctrination with a well-armed neo-Nazi militia should cause alarm. Not only are white supremacists from across the West flocking to Ukraine to learn from the combat experiences of their fascist brothers in arms, they are doing so openly, chronicling their experiences on social media before they bring their lessons back home. But U.S. law enforcement has done nothing so far to restrict the flow of right-wing American extremists to Azov's bases. Their is one likely explanation for the US government's hands-off approach to Azov recruitment. The extremist militia is fighting pro-Russian separatists as a frontline proxy of Washington. In fact, the United States has directly armed the Azov Battalion, forking over anti-tank rocket launchers, and even sending a team of Army officers to meet in the field with Azov commanders in 2017. Though Congress passed legislation this year forbidding military aid to Azov on the grounds of its white supremacist ideology, the Trump administration's authorization of $200 million in offensive weaponry and aid to the Ukrainian military makes it likely new stores of weapons will wind up the extremist regiment's hands. Wind up in, I'm presuming. When queried by reporters about evidence of American military training of Azov personnel, multiple U.S. Azov boasts combat experience, unlimited access to light weapons, and supporters honeycombed throughout the upper echelons of Ukraine's military and government. Buffering again. Oh, unstable connection, huh? Oh, there we go. Don't worry, YouTube. I'm willing to play this game. No longer just a militia. The organization has developed into a political juggernaut that can overpower Ukraine, bringing out 10,000 supporters to demand that the government bend to their will or face a coup. With its military experience and weapons, Azov has the ability to blackmail the government and defend themselves politically against any opposition. They say that if the government will not advance an ideology similar to theirs, they will overthrow it. Ivan Kachanovsky, a professor of political science at the University of Oxford, explaining currently the organizations that are fascist are as supportive of the geopolitical agenda against Russia. So condemnations are limited to violence or human rights abuses. The revelations of collaboration between violent American white supremacists and a neo-Nazi militia armed by the Pentagon add another scandalous chapter to a history of blowback that dates back to the 1950s, when the CIA rehabilitated several Ukrainian Nazi collaborators across the Atlantic from the Ukrainian capital of Kiev to sun-washed suburbs of Southern California, where some of the most rabid modern white supremacist gangs were born. The White Nationalist Fight Club. This October, 4 members of the RAM gang, Robert Rundo, Benjamin Drake Davis, Paul Mireles, and were arrested by FBI agents. They were accused of using the internet to encourage, promote, participate in, and carry out riots from Huntington Beach to Berkeley, California. 4 other members had been arrested in connection with their participation in the white supremacist riot in Charlottesville, Virginia, where a counter-protester, Heather Heyer, was killed in a vehicular homicide by a white supremacist. RAM first appeared in the national limelight during a celebration of Donald Trump's election victory in Huntington Beach in March 2017, as about 100 far-right activists marched along the beach donned in red Make America Great Again caps. Hey. Yes, things are cool, Eric. The first part of this went without a hitch until I got to this circle. Just on one of many coinky-dinks. They were confronted by a small group of anti-racist counter-demonstrators. When a melee ensued, RAM members assaulted their outnumbered opponents, pummeling them into submission and even attacking a local reporter. Afterwards, Orange County police arrested several anti-racist demonstrators, but the RAM gang walked free. Just want to make sure everybody understands exactly where this guy's coming from. RAM markets itself as a self-defense organization that protects the free speech of white Americans against an onslaught of cultural Marxism, a classic anti-Semitic trope. Its founders emphasize a vaguely anti-consumerist fight club mentality, along with a rigorous dedication to mixed martial arts. Its co-founder, Rundo, operates an online clothing and apparel company, Right Brand Clothing, that hawks slickly designed t-shirts promoting European Brotherhood stickers, emphasizing a straight-edge nationalist lifestyle, and ethically sourced designer demagogue pants. Yes, white supremacists apparently care about sweatshops. REM members can be seen at the site modeling their gear with a clean-cut, fashy look that contrasts sharply with the stereotypical image of skinheads and jackboots. RAM's careful attention to its public image has not stopped us from putting their crude neo-Nazi ideology on display at rallies. However, during the Huntington Beach riot, for example, REM's Robert Bowman was seen with a sign reading "De Goyim No." This alt-right slogan refers to the white nationalist understanding of mean, I'll say that, RAM's Rundo camera in Huntington Beach. The gang leader was referring to the notorious 14-word slogan coined by convicted white supremacist terrorist David Lane, which has become a rallying cry for fascists across. We must secure the existence of our people and the future of children. 2 months after the violence in Huntington Beach, 2 REM members were photographed. Among the volumes they torched were the Diary of Anne Frank, the 9/11. Oh, look, we're buffering. There we go. See, the 9/11 Commission Report and Schindler's List. Beside evoking memories of the early days of Nazi Germany, the spectacle cast the group's purported devotion to free speech in an extremely ironic light. Following RAM's highly publicized street battles, the group became the subject of intense media scrutiny. Now, I want to actually, at this point, does anybody remember, have you ever heard of the Rise Above movement? It would be, I wouldn't mind if any of you wanted to just say yes or no in the chat. Had you ever heard of this group? Did you ever hear that these guys went to Ukraine, fought in Ukraine, and then got arrested for fighting in Ukraine? Just would, just in case, because I know that, the chat will still be playing back. So it would, is this news to you? In October 2017, the all right, there we go. The investigative outlet ProPublica produced a video that exposed the identity of REM's core membership. Yeah, there. Awesome. All right, there we go. You rise against, yes, as some group from the Hot Topic, but yeah, you never heard it. Nobody's ever heard of this. Wondered why they had not been investigated by law enforcement for their violent actions at Huntington Beach and elsewhere, but the media coverage of REM glossed over the group's attraction to a burgeoning Atlantic conglomeration of white supremacists that centered on U.S. allied Ukraine as the base for a fascist reconquest of Europe. By the spring of 2018, REM leadership was barnstorming through Germany and Italy and heading east to meet fascist cohorts from across the West at a conference in Kiev. Barnstorming. Wasn't that just a few guys were traveling around? They're barnstorming because of all the barns that they're storming. I guess in their biplanes, like the Red Baron. REM's Ukrainian hate-cation. Buried in the FBI indictment of our members are details of their meetings with one of the key figures in Ukraine's neo-Nazi Azov Battalion. In August, according to the indictment, REM members published photos on Instagram showing themselves meeting with Olena Semanyaka, the leader of the International Department of the Battalion. They have something here that from the FBI. When I edit this, I'll be making sure to put all the same information in the underbar so you can be more. Indictment also referred to video of REM co-founder Benjamin Drake Daly performing a crossed forearm salute to the Southern California, based white supremacists, while in Ukraine. RAM's Gab account provides additional details of the group's foray through Ukraine this May. The trip centered around the Pan-Europa Conference, an event that brought together fascists from West to encourage international collaboration. It is hosted at the Reconquista Club, first American to compete in the Pan-European organization Reconquista in Ukraine, RAM declared on its Gab account. This was a great experience meeting nationalists that came as far as Portugal and take part. The visit, which followed on the heels of meetings with white supremacists in Germany and with Italy's fascists, highlighted this. You'll see from part 1 the history of that. Further, the Pan-Europa Conference, where fascists build across national borders, revealed the Azov Battalion was much more than a militia fighting for control of a sliver of contested territory in eastern Ukraine. Oh, really? Semeniaka did not respond to an interview request delivered through Facebook Messenger. However, she told Radio Free Europe's Christopher Miller, again, part 1, I discussed the fascinating history of Radio Free Europe with this same issue of former World War II SS members eventually staffing Radio Free Europe. Christopher Miller, that RAM came to learn our ways and showed interest in learning how to create youth forces in the way Azov has. Today, Azov leaders openly acknowledge that were it not for the US-backed coup that unfolded in Kiev's Maidan Square in 2014. Isn't that odd? As Semeniaka said this year, according to a summary, the Ukrainian nationalist movement would have never reached such a level of development unless the war with Russia had begun. For the first time since the Second World War, nationalist formations have managed to create their own military wings, the brightest example being the Azov regime of the National Guard of Ukraine. The right-wing revolution on the Maidan. The 2013 through 14 Maidan revolt was the cataclysmic event that Ukraine's already potent ultra-nationalist camp had been waiting for. The protests erupted in Kiev's Maidan Square after the democratically elected President Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign an economic association agreement with the EU. Now this guy is starting to get into what this is really about. Celebrated in the West as a pro-Western movement guided by tech-savvy middle-class youth, Euromaidan depended heavily for its success on phalanxes of black-masked hard men from right sector. See appendix at bottom. Svoboda co-founder Ole Tyanybok, who had once demanded an investigation of the Jewish Muscovite mafia that he saw controlling Ukraine, appeared on stage at the square beside, let's see if it buffers now, U.S. Senators John McCain and Chris Murphy when they arrived to encourage the protesters. Another key figure in Ukraine's neo-Nazi scene was Andriy Biletsky, a university PhD who stressed physical violence as a means to revolutionary change. Biletsky led the Patriot of Ukraine militia, an early forerunner of Azov that attacked migrant camps and menaced foreigners. In a manifesto published during the height of the Maidan clashes, Biletsky outlined his post-revolutionary agenda. The historic mission of our nation in this critical moment is to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade for their survival, he wrote, a crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen. In May 2014, right sector and an assortment of far-right forces banded together to massacre their opponents in Odessa, attacking a pro-separatist protest camp with iron pipes, then burning the fleeing protesters alive after they took shelter in a local trade union building. Over 40 pro-separatist Ukrainian citizens were consumed in the flames. The US and EU studiously looked the other way, legitimizing the violence and setting the stage for more. Behind the scenes, US Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland and Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt were carefully stage managing the opposition, positioning the pliable Arseny Yatsenyuk as the future leader of the United States. Meanwhile, billionaire-backed youth power entities like Omidyar Network and Open Society Foundation plowed money into the opposition, providing it with high ticket overnight. Given the amount of U.S. investment in regime change in Ukraine, it was necessary for American pundits who cheered on the operation to downplay or simply deny the central role neo-Nazi forces played in making it all possible. And perhaps the most absurd attempt at whitewashing the fascist presence, the neoconservative pundit James Kirchhoff. Now this is an interesting one. If you just put in some of these things like James Kirchhoff, Azov Battalion, James Kirchhoff neo-Nazis, James Kirchhoff Ukrainian junta, you won't find this article from Foreign Affairs, but you will find a bunch of other articles. He really apparently wanted people to not know about this. He really wanted, I mean, this is his career apparently. Described right sector as, in an article for Foreign Affairs, as Putin's imaginary Nazis. The link will not work. Apparently Foreign Affairs has deleted it. Anti-Semitism refused to support a congressional effort because, quote, the focus should be on Russia. Oh, there we go, buffering. Please, we imaginary Nazis of patriot and assorted football ultra angel symbol. And for Wikipedia, which I will have the link below when I edit this, you will find all of this summarized. And I just want to note right now, I worked in a cafe up until recently, and I saw, this is in the middle of the hippie town of Eugene, Oregon, a young girl with Ukrainian, that gold and blue symbology. And everyone would know what that is. But nobody had any idea what that was. Because I know how to tell in my mind, I acted just as unaware. Which also happens to be incorporated into the logo of the US-based Aryan nations. On the front lines of, and I want to make sure, remember, and somebody who knows me very well in the chat, at University of Puget Sound in 1994 or 93, there was a defector from the Aryan nations, and he had photos from some of their various rites, and he took the photos from behind so that nobody's faces were shown, as people were given like knighthoods or something like that. And some of these people were in navy dress blues openly, just so we get a sense, because if you recall, arms shipments were ceased, then they were started again. There's going to be more coming up about this. Who then suddenly appears in front of Congress talking about a phone call that they overheard Donald Trump having about quid pro quo, blah, blah, blah. Colonel Vindman, who also happens to have a brother who works in the NSA. Let's see if it buffers. What are the odds that two recent immigrants of only about a generation, both from Ukraine, would hold positions that high in the security and military apparatus of our country? Isn't that odd? That there's just so many coincidences going on. The front lines of Eastern Ukrainian flashpoints battle Russian-speaking separatists and set up government-sponsored indoctrination. It has a 9-part series on YouTube. These camps. And you will note on the back of the legs of one of the young ladies are tattoos that are obvious what's going on, because the words are in English, not in Cyrillic, not in German, in English. Marx and the evils of foreigners. Azov, Azov was subsequently absorbed. That's so weird. I think this is supposed to say Azov was subsequently absorbed in Ukraine's military as a National Guard unit and began appearing in the field with PSRL-1 rocket launchers supplied under the watch of the U.S. Department of Defense. In November 2017, Azov leadership received a team of U.S. Army officers for training and logistical discussions. See below and to the right. There's photos. Yes, there's Army officers visiting. You could see that they made sure to circle the flag on one guy's arm and circle the Azov Battalion's patch on the other. By the time Congress approved a ban on arms to Azov this year, the Trump administration had already authorized a new shipment of offensive weapons to the Ukrainian military, including advanced Javelin anti-tank missiles. As in Syria, where the CIA-backed Free Syrian Army functioned as a de facto weapons farm for jihadist groups, including Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, any new U.S. arms are likely to wind up in the possession of Azov, the congressional ban notwithstanding. Again, let me pause here. There is a channel, Storm Clouds Gathering. His channel was the first channel I ever heard of being mass demonetized. I had never heard of this policy. I had never heard of it being done. From what I understand, he was never given any explanation. He apparently knew how to translate Arabic. So he translated newscasts from the Middle East, and in one uniform is a guy from the Free Syrian Army. Oh, and then suddenly he's in a different uniform, and he's speaking for Jabhat al-Nusra. And then he got that famous photo of John McCain with all those members of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra, who also just so happened to be in photos of the Free Syrian Army. It's very corrupt in Ukraine, and money can be stolen, same as in Syria, where extremist fighters got guns from US-backed units, said Kachanovsky. Azov can just establish new political fronts so they can circumvent the US prohibitions. Foreign fighters for fascism. The Azov Battalion has received not only US weapons, but also volunteer American military veterans like Brian Boyanger It's not illegal, Boyanger told a Ukraine Today interviewer of his presence in an Azov camp. From a U.S. perspective, as long as you're not fighting with a terrorist group or committing war crimes or things like that, it's legal. Mostly I've been serving as kind of like an advisor. Now note, none of you heard anything about this, but I bet a lot of you saw those goofy photos of supposedly like queer-ish people of proclaiming that they were members of Antifa that were edited with the YPG Kurdish interviews of people. And that it's come over and over again how they've had people that they had medics who understood, you know, how bad, you know, things could get if there was any kind of, you know, violence or gunfire because of their field experience. Not only got investigated, there was a, have you ever heard of this? Also welcome Islamist fighters from Chechnya. I wonder if maybe the famous Motorola was there. I used to watch all of this. People off to continue their long war against Russia in a new theater. A sniper from Sweden with typical neo-Nazi views, Mikhail Skilt, has been assigned to oversee an entire Azov regiment. One about that have flocked to Ukraine to join the fascist tank. Oh, people can't buffering so hard. One foreign fighter from France, a young anti-Semite named Gregoire, returned from a Ukrainian militia camp in 2016, armed to the teeth and ready to strike synagogues, mosques, and the 2016 soccer championships when he was arrested on the Ukrainian border by national police. Street Patrol Unit, a slickly produced members marching in formation into Kiev as Beletsky, their ideological guide, impelled them to restore Ukrainian order to a corrupted society. I wonder if in Ukrainian that word would translate as degenerate. The street patrol was openly backed by Interior Minister Arsen Avakov, a powerful patron of Azov. Yes, puppies, kitties, and happy rainbow puppies. Yes, yes, indeed, Eric. This year, the National Drew 14, the present notorious 14 words mantra of lethal pogroms against the local Roma population, vandalized the offices of insufficiently pliant politicians, stormed city council meetings, and even sued Hromska station that was established with U.S. funding for describing their members as neo-Nazis. Their connection to power is why they can commit any crime, and they will never be punished. Kachanovsky said of Azov and its various street muscle brigades, because they have the police and senior police members like Vadim Troyan, they can intimidate people and intimidate politicians with impunity. Once a member of Azov, Troyan now serves as Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Interior. The U.S. now serves as Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Interior. The U.S. has violence to Ukraine. It has been complicit in legitimizing the. This November, America House Kiev, a U.S. government-funded cultural center, hosted a speech by a uniformed leader of the neo-Nazi C-14 gang, Serhiy Bondar. Oh, there we go. Oh, so much instability. Let's have a sip of the drink. Boy, don't know how long long they last with all the instability that's happening on the stream. So odd, because the next line is rather consequential. Oh, it's buffering. It's still buffering. Boy, oh boy, all the buffering. It is so weird. Oh, people are losing their ability to see the stream. Oh, it's just so unstable. What a horribly unstable connection, huh? Hardwired into the internet, but still, it's too unstable. Let's just type a little something. Oh, the instability now that Paul Ryan is about to come up. Let's just do that. All right. Okay, you can see me. It's saying my connection's unstable or something. So, Republican House Majority Leader Paul Ryan and the NATO-funded Atlantic Council hosted Andriyovych, the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament and co-founder of the fascist Social National Party, for a friendly exchange on Capitol Hill. Given the free rein and open acceptance right-wing extremists enjoy in post-Maidan Ukraine, it is no wonder the country has become a haven for fascists from across the West. The Grand Reconquista strategy. As the international secretary of Azov's National Corps, Olena Semonyaka, has emerged as one of the most prolific publicists of Eastern European fascism, with jet black hair and faintly Gothic look. Oh, the terrible instability. Boy, just what a weird coincidence. So many of these coincidences, folks. Just keeps, every time it's starting to come up to important names, just keeps getting unstable. The jet black hair and a faintly Gothic look, she brands herself as a traditionalist, emulating her hero, Julius Evola, the late Italian occultist, philosopher who espoused a racism spirit. Though she has been photographed bearing a Nazi flag and throwing up a Sieg Heil salute, Semonyaka has also been a welcome guest on Ukrainian nationalist TV to promote her campaign. I know, totally. Yes. Chat, use countermeasures, talk about dogs and cats. Oh, the dogs and cats, they're so cute. Boy, oh boy, do we like dogs and cats. Adorable dogs and puppies and rainbows. On Ukrainian nationalist TV to promote her campaign for the release of Ukrainian nationalist activists held by Russia. Actually, let's just make sure. Let's so that you all will know. Let's see, what's it? Olena Semonyaka for further reference. There we go. Oh yeah, see that? Yeah, there we go. There we go, YouTube. Oh, it just keeps doing it. In her role with Azov, Semonyaka organizes conferences aimed at popularizing the concept of the Great European Reconquista, a pan-European fascist nationalist takeover that begins in the former Soviet satellite states and ultimately sweeps through Western Europe on the strength of anti-foreigner resentment. Key to this, we have American military bases all around Russia, even though. So when Trump suddenly told everybody, cough up money to be, you got to pay. interesting little interesting coinky-dink there too. Semeniaka laid out the fascist grand strategy in Kiev at a December 26th gathering of black metal fans from across Europe called Pact of Steel. For a long period, the success of the right in Western Europe, the rise of the right became, because of refugee influx and terror, gives the chance for the realization of our Pact of Steel between East and West, between Western and Eastern European nationalists. Isn't that odd, though, that because of the European Stability Initiative's paper on these published before the Syrian civil war, this would have never even happened? And who insisted that Syrians should be able to enter Europe? Former Stasi cadet Herr Merkel. She continued, "Our main task today is to show to Western nationalists, to inform them that Putin's Russia is no alternative to the EU of the West, and that the only ally for them is an alternative axis of European integration, which is being formed now in Kiev, Central and Eastern Europe, as a springboard for the all-European reconquest, for the new Europe between the EU and neo-Soviet, neo-Bolshevik Putin's Russia." Semeniaka, so unstable, just staying unstable, just can't get any stability going. It's so sad, so sad that I could multi-box Eve online, but somehow just can't seem to live stream without an unstable connection. Semeniaka and other Ukrainian fascist ideologues refer to the regional springboard for the European reconquest as the intermarium. This is a concept originally envisioned after World War I by Polish military leader Józef Pilsudski, who imagined a confederation of countries from the Baltic to the Black Sea. That's interesting. As a counterweight to German and Russian aggression. Though his idea never materialized, Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the failure of the EU and NATO to prevent it revived interest in the intermarium. One of the biggest boosters of the alliance, the right-wing Polish president Andrzej Duda, saw it primarily through the prism of regional security. The extreme right in Ukraine, however, understood the intermarium as an ethnically pure base for exporting their revolution to the rest of Europe. The first intermarium conference was held in Kiev in January 2016. Now, also, I'm wondering, could somebody say, if you're seeing me, pop it in the chat, because, I mean, really, I have no idea if it's just buffering. I have no clue. It's saying that my connection's unstable. The first Intermarium conference was held in Kiev in January 2016 under the banner of Azov's National War. Semeniaka headlined the event alongside Beletsky, the Azov founder, welcoming far-right activists from Poland and the Baltic states. Sweet. Okay, thank you very much. Within a year, the concept was promoted in an officially sanctioned event at the Latvian embassy in Kiev. Awesome. Okay. And from part 1, you'll see Latvia came up as one of these places we recruited. A whole bunch of, when you mention names, it buffers. I figured that was the case. That the Latvian is, so we recruited a bunch of people from Latvia via the CIA, FBI, INS, and DOD, and yeah, There, the Latvian ambassador welcomed a who's who of the Ukrainian fascist scene, from Svoboda to National Corps representatives like Semeniaka, for a ceremony honoring Peter Radzins, a Latvian general who advocated for the Intermarium. Organized by Latvia's far-right National Alliance Party, a member of the country's governing coalition, the spectacle provided Azov's leaders with the sheen of international legitimacy, as Matthew Kot, an academic expert on the European far-right, argued. Latvia's membership in the EU and NATO allows it to act as a Trojan horse for increasing the clout of the far-right in the Euro-Atlantic community. While historical tensions between the Intermarium nations are still simmering, Semeniaka has pleaded with her international allies to heed the call of the late pro-Hitler British black shirt leader Oswald Mosley for a great act of oblivion of all our former struggles, conflicts, historical enmity. What we need, she argued, is the revival of a sense of the new European aristocracy, a new European unity as a real basis for the union I am talking about. You will see that when I edit this and post in the bottom, there will be a name. I believe it's Hans Glöbke. And so lines like that will make much more sense as you look into Glöbke, the man who not only justified the Nuremberg race laws, survived into post-war Germany to become a high-ranking member in their government after his service to the Austrian painter, but also that he is where we get the idea of the European Union even from as a legal entity. There are no historical grievances between American white supremacists and their cohorts in Ukraine. After all, the US government has made itself the main guarantor of Ukraine's security, going as far as directly arming Azov in its bid to bleed Russia. And decades before the US-backed extremists in contemporary Ukraine, the CIA ran a program to rehabilitate former Nazi collaborators from the country as anti-communist intelligence assets. Backing Ukrainian fascists is a grand American tradition indeed. This November, during the latest Pan-Europa conference organized by Semeniaka as a safe space for fascists from across the West, she played host to one of the most prominent self-styled intellectuals of America's white nationalist movement, Greg Johnson. I think that what's happening in Ukraine is a model and an inspiration for nationalists of all white nations, and I wanted to learn as much as possible about what we're doing here and see as much as what you're doing here and see as much as possible. Johnson told his rapt audience, and I'm enormously impressed, and I'm taking notes. Johnson is a highbrow racist who publishes a journal, Countercurrents, which I've read that advances what he calls white identity politics. Like the Rise Above movement leaders before him, he was clearly inspired by his visit to Kiev. "I'm already planning to come back," Johnson exclaimed during a breakout session. "I'm very impressed with what I've seen here. I want to come back and learn more." So I wanted to have that as an outline so that there was also then some further things. This article is more than 6 years old. Azov fighters are Ukraine's greatest weapon and maybe its greatest threat. From The Guardian. The battalion's far-right volunteers' desire to bring the fight to Kiev is a danger to post-conflict stability. By Shaun Walker-Wednesday, the 10th of September, 2014. "I have nothing against Russian nationalists or a great Russia," said Dmitry, as we sped through a dark Mariupol night in a pickup truck, a machine gunner positioned in the back. "But Putin's not even a Russian. Putin's a Jew." Dmitry, which he said is not his real name, is a native of East Ukraine and a member of the Azov Battalion, a volunteer grouping that has been doing much of the frontline fighting in Ukraine's war with pro-Russian separatists. The Azov, one of many volunteer brigades who fight alongside the Ukrainian army in the east of the country, has developed a reputation for fearlessness in battle. But there is an increasing worry that while the Azov and other volunteer battalions might be Ukraine's most potent and reliable force on the battlefield against separatists, they also pose the most serious threat. to the Ukrainian government and perhaps even the state. When the conflict in the east is over, the Azov causes particular concerns due to the far-right, even neo-Nazi leanings of its members. Dmitry claimed not to be a Nazi, but waxed lyrical about Adolf Hitler as a military leader and believes the Holocaust never happened. Not everyone in the Azov Battalion thinks like Dmitry, but after speaking with dozens of its fighters and embedding on several missions during the past week in and around the strategic port city of Mariupol, The Guardian found many of them to have disturbing political views and almost all to be intent on bringing the fight to Kiev when the war in the east is over. The battalion's symbol is reminiscent of the Nazi wolf's angel, though the bringing goofy traffic. Oh, weird. Thank you. Interesting. Though the what was that? Oh, and there we go. Battalion claims it is in fact meant to be the letters N and I crossed over each other, standing for national idea. Again, in the photos that former Aryan Nations member posted, that's the symbol that you see in the background on a flag, is that NI symbol. I have seen this on many ex-cons as well, typically someone with neo group, and even those who laughed off at people who were instructed in Nordic mythology, said one fighter. When asked, he said, National Socialist. As for the swastika tattoos on at least one man seen at the Azov base, the swastika has nothing to do with it. The battalion has drawn far-right volunteers from abroad, such as Mikhail Skilt, a 37-year-old Swede trained as a sniper in the Swedish army, who described himself as an ethnic nationalist. And despite the present elements, Russian propaganda that claims Kiev's fascist junta wants to cleanse East Ukraine of Russian speakers is overblown. The Azov are a minority among the Ukrainian forces, and even they, however unpleasant their views may be, are not. In fact, the lingua franca of the battalion is Russian, and most have Russian as their first language. Views of the more radical Russian nationalists fighting with the separatist side. The battalion even has a Russian volunteer, a 30-year-old from St. Petersburg, who refused to give his name. He said many of the Russian rebel commanders positively, especially Igor Strelkov, a former FSB officer who has a passion for military reenactments and appears to see himself as a Tsarist officer. He, quote, wants to resurrect Putin's game, he said, and he hoped that Russia would time have a nationalist, violent Maidan of its own. Recall, Putin crushed a quote-unquote Maidan in Moscow itself. On one afternoon earlier this week, The Guardian traveled with a group of Azov fighters to hand over several boxes of bullets to Ukrainian border guards during an artillery attack in Mariupol. In the days before, the border guards had come to the rescue of a group of Azov fighters, and the bullets were their way of saying thank you. Everything in this war is based on personal links. Kiev does nothing, explained the Azov's Russian volunteer. As we sped towards a checkpoint in a civilian Chevrolet, the boot full with the one of the windows shot out by gunfire during a recent battle. This is how it works. You go to some hotspot, they see you're really brave, you exchange phone numbers, and next time you can call in a favor. If you need an artillery strike, you can call and you'll be dead. Or you can call the captain or major commanding the artillery battalion, and they will help you out straight away. We are Azov, and they know that if they ever needed it, we would be there for them. For the commanders and the generals in Kiev, who many in Azov and other volunteer battalions see as responsible for the awful losses the Ukrainian army has suffered in recent weeks, especially in the ill-fated retreat from Ilovaisk, there was only contempt. Generals like those in charge of Ilovaisk should be imprisoned for treason, said Skilt. Heads are going to roll for sure. I think there will be a battle for power. The Ukrainian armed forces are an army of lions led by sheep, said Dmitry. And there is only so long that that dynamic can continue. With so many armed, battle-hardened, and angry young men coming back from the front, there is a danger that the rolling of heads could be more than a metaphor. Dmitry said he believes that Ukraine needs a strong dictator to come to power who could shed plenty of blood but unite the nation in the process. Many in Azov Battalion with whom the Guardian spoke shared this view, which is a long way from the drive for European ideals and democracy that drove the protests in Kiev at the beginning. The Russian volunteer fighting with Azov said he believes Ukraine needs a junta that will restrict civil rights for a while, but help bring order and unite the country. This disciplinarian streak was visible in the battalion. Drinking is strictly forbidden. One time there was a guy who got drunk, but the commander beat him in his face and legs until he could not move. Then he was kicked out, recalled one fighter proudly. Other volunteer battalions have also come under the spotlight this week. Amnesty International called on the Ukrainian government to investigate rights abuses and possible executions by the IDAR, another battalion. The failure to stop abuses and possible war crimes by volunteer battalions risks significantly aggravating tensions in the east of the country and undermining proclaimed intentions of the new Ukrainian authorities to strengthen and uphold the rule of law more broadly, said Salil Shetty, Amnesty International Secretary General in Kiev. Fighters from the battalion told The Guardian last month they expected a new revolution in Ukraine that would bring a more decisive military leader to power, in sentiments similar to those of many Azov fighters. Despite the desire of many in the Azov to bring violence to Kiev, when the war in the east is over, the battalion receives funding and assistance from the governor of Donetsk region, the oligarch Serhiy Taruta, an aide to Taruta, Alex Kovjun, said the political views of individual members of Azov were not an issue and denied the battalion's symbol had Nazi undertones. The views of some of them is their own affair as long as they do not break the law, said Kovjun, in written answers to questions, and the symbol is not Nazi. Trust me, some of my family died in concentration camps, so I have a well-developed nose for Nazi shit. As well as their frontline duties in Viking reenactments, and once ran a tour firm in Thailand. Kurt returned to East Ukraine to join the Azov. He took the Guardian on an overnight patrol through the outskirts of Mariupol and the villages around the front line. Part separatist hunters, part city cops, with rules to restrain. They traveled in a convoy of 3 vehicles, all heavily armed. As midnight approached, we set off across the bridge, dashed from the front to rushed at the guns. A startling half-smoked cigarette emerged, smoothing her hair. The Azov fighters apologized, but only after demanding documents and thoroughly searching the car. As we edged climb later, fighters sprinted toward a suspicious part again. The men had stumbled upon people just trying to have a plastic beach. Azov has been partially brought into the military, officially function as a special police unit. There are discussions that Azov and other battalions could be integrated into the party or special forces when the conflict is over. Some of them, however, are hoping Ukraine will look very different in the not-so-distant future, while they may be a tiny minority when it comes to Ukraine as a whole lot of weapons. President Petro Poroshenko will be killed in a matter of months, Dmitry said, and a dictator will come to power. Now that is interesting. What are the police going to do? They cannot do anything against the peaceful protesters on Maidan. Peaceful protest. They are hardly going to withstand armed fighting units. Now, this one, I'm expecting a lot of buffering. Keep the spirit of the Maidan alive. April 7th, 2014. By George Soros from the Open Societies Foundation website. Ukraine is something of a miracle. A group of unarmed citizens rose up and overwhelmed a police force with orders to shoot to kill them. We are witnessing the birth of a new nation, a new Ukraine, with a limitless future made possible by people willing to sacrifice their lives for their country. And, of course, puppies and rainbows and fuzzy little rabbits and good things that YouTube likes, so that they won't suddenly make my stream magically go down. In order for Ukrainians to realize that future, the spirit of the Maidan must be preserved. They will need international support. It won't be easy. Europe can only provide so much help, with the EU itself is in a crisis. Russia looms with its dominant military might, and neither Europe nor the US have appetite for armed conflict in this part of the world. Putin believes in displays of force. He flexes his muscles. Flexing. See, like him riding the bear in that photo. Throwing, doing lots of judo, flexing. Expects people to fall in line. He will do what he can to thwart progress, to keep the country mired in its corrupt past. But that doesn't mean Russia can defeat the new Ukraine. I think people are willing to endure what hardships Putin deals out in order to build a better future here. And my foundation is working with experts in Ukraine to create a strategy for keeping the spirit of the Maidan alive. He's probably passing out, lots of puppies. Passing out puppies. Good on you, George. There we go. Just How to put that, you know, just so anybody else watching this who maybe thinks that I'm up to something knows that I like that George Soros is helping these people keep their dogs fluffy and their coats healthy, and their dogs won't have bad breath. We can help support free and fair elections in May and encourage Parliament to pass laws giving candidates equal time on television to make their case to the country. The people of Ukraine should choose their own representative, and they must seize the moment to reform the judiciary, because you wouldn't want the judiciary, an office looking into corruption, to get in the way of progress. You see, the judiciary is stopping the progress. They kick out Yatsenyuk, right? Poroshenko's in there, but oh no, the judiciary is stopping the progress, and people are looking into all this corruption. Oh, how are they going to progress? People are getting in the way of that. It's almost as if it would be like some people want a dictator. I don't know. I mean, let's see what more George has to say about how to get progress in Ukraine. This is vitally important, and you can't do it piecemeal. Ukrainians need the rule of law, with judges paid a proper salary to help prevent them from taking bribes. The EU has billions at its disposal. Just a fraction of that could make a huge difference in cleaning up the court system, and that would have a huge ripple effect, making it so much easier to attract investment and put the country on the path to economic prosperity. This will not happen overnight. We have been involved in judicial reform movements for more than 25 years, and it is hard work. What's more, a lot of expenditures will have to be cut to bring the budget under control. As everybody knows, oh, there we go, Yanukovych, not Yatsenyuk, Yanukovych family raided the treasury, leaving the country's finances a mess. But there is a unique opportunity here. Ukrainians have already started and a learning process, but focusing on these goals will put Ukraine on the right track and honor the solidarity, the courage, and the dignity of the Maidan. January 6, 2015. Are there Nazis in Ukraine? Joshua Kovsky on Speak Out, or I'm sorry, on truthout.org. Just so you know, I'm no who would want to depend upon the conflict in Ukraine held in honor of World War II era this past Thursday, January 1st, 2015. And see, oh no, oh darn it. This usually really just pops like right up. Let's see. Oh no, that's not who I'm looking for at all. But yeah, I thought I actually some of these torchlight marches, so you get familiar with Stepan Bandera's fantastic. It just makes all the peaceful. They march and march. They love it. They love marching. And marking 106 years to his birth, confirming that understanding the past is essential for making sense of the future. Maidan came from a wide gamut of Ukraine's civil society. In the U.S. Congress, difficult questions report for the neo-Nazi right sector, and in Russia, alarm was raised when pictures of protesters wearing what? Nazi insignia and later Ukrainian army soldiers with fascist beliefs were revealed. The questions of what to make of modern-day Nazi and of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, and Stepan Bandera suddenly became relevant and highlighted again the importance of understanding history and understanding the present. As one who lost people on both sides of my family to German and Ukrainian fascists, I was very interested in making a sense of past as well as present events. To this end, I visited Lvov, Ukraine in December 2014 and read historical articles seeking to understand to what degree Ukrainian fascists were involved in World War II atrocities. This article is a culmination of these efforts. Following the coup that took place in Kiev, Ukraine in February 2014, who was president then and who was vice president then? Rumors have surfaced of neo-Nazis marching in the streets of the city in a fascist takeover. Many have dismissed such claims as propaganda nonsense. I like that. Propaganda nonsense used by Russia to discredit the toppling of a president it happened to like. When Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke about fascists in Ukraine, many greeted his words with scorn and belittling. In an article titled Putin's Imaginary Nazis, again, this article has been mentioned. It's supposed to be in Foreign Affairs, but James Kirchick's Foreign Affairs article can't seem to be found, wrote that one of the groups that took a central part in the Maidan coup, Right Sector, known for its violent tactics, was neither fascist nor Nazi. He argued that Jews were members of Right Sector, that Israel's ambassador met with Dmytro Yarosh, the head of the group, therefore ruling out any anti-Semitism, and that if Right Sector had actually executed a coup, it would be in control of the country's armed forces, while it was not. However, Kirchick was not entirely correct. In fact, Right Sector gangs were integrated into the National Guard and sent to fight in East Ukraine, while the Ukrainian Azov Battalion, accused of committing war crimes in the East, has attracted many Nazis. It was become undeniable that neo-Nazi units are operating in Ukraine with full governmental support. The question of fascism in Ukraine has involved me personally. My grandfather, on my mother's side, an American Jewish doctor who fought during World War II for the U.S. Army, told me that his family is originally from Lvov, Ukraine. His relatives who remained behind were exterminated by fascists. Lvov was the first city in Ukraine to be occupied by the Germans in June 1941 in a pogrom in which 2,000 people were massacred, followed shortly thereafter. On the other side of my family, my father, a Zionist activist in Kiev during the USSR period, recounted how many in his family were exterminated by the German army and Ukrainian police in the famous Babi Yar massacre near Kiev in September 1941. On that occasion, 33,771 people were shot to death in one of the largest single massacres of World War II. The subject of Nazis in the present and not only in the past has emerged in full force. U.S. Senator John McCain and Victoria Nuland met in person with Ole Tyahnybok, leader of the Svoboda Party, whose former name was the Social National Party of Ukraine, and its symbol was the wolf's angel. This is despite the fact that Tyahnybok said earlier that Ukrainians must fight against the Muscovite Jewish mafia and stop the criminal actions of organized Jewry. Both Svoboda and Right Sector see themselves as ideological heirs to the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Ukrainian Insurgent Army, and the Nazi Genocide in Ukraine, page 3. It's a link in this article from truthout.org. And as admirers of Stepan Bandera, who advocated for an independent Ukraine during World War II, the question of who Stepan Bandera and OUN were attracted much attention and debate precisely due to the fact that his pictures were upheld by protesters in Lvov and Kiev. Very good. Batya Ungar Sargon That's an interesting hyphenated name. First name is Batya. Last name is Ungar Sargon. Argued in Tablet magazine that the ideology of OUN and Bandera was inherently anti-Semitic, and that assassinations were rarely carried out against Jews. In her view, at the time, Ukraine's Jews were naturally Soviet partisans, and that made them targets for Bandera and the OUN. Right sector Ukrainian parliament member Borislav Bereza, remember, it might be Berezha, who is also Jewish and supportive of Bandera, argues that Bandera fought those who opposed Ukrainian independence and was not an anti-Semitic. According to Berezha, the fact that Bandera was imprisoned by the Germans and later killed by the Soviets proves that was against the Germans and he was against the Soviets, not fascists, and Jews joined it too. Note that. In December 2014, I decided to go to Lvov, ultra-nationalist city in West Ukraine, where a huge memorial to Bandera stands, to see the place for myself and make sense of the past. Lvov, also known as Lemberg in German, Lvov in Russian, and Lwów in Polish, was where the first killing of Jews by the Nazis in Ukraine took place. A friend and I made our way to Lvov by crossing in from Poland. We were stopped on false pretenses right after crossing the border by a policeman who claimed that the driver was drunk, an entirely false accusation. We were forced to bribe him to continue on our way and realized how harsh the current economic situation must be, and that police forces are probably not getting paid on time. In Lvov, I saw the house of the famous Jewish writer Shalom Aleichem. Okay, it's just if you know the song, that it's just a kind of, yeah. A large old sign in Yiddish announcing this reminded us of a different era, when Lvov was known as Lvov, Lviv. So Lviv, it's with an I, was known as Lvov. I keep saying Lvov. A multicultural city with Polish, Hungarian, Russian, German, and Ukrainian influences, and the third largest Jewish city in Poland. Home to 100,000 Jews, Jewish residents used to fondly call the city Lemberg, which the city had a Yiddish theater along with many Orthodox synagogues. In 1939, Poles comprised over 50%, Jews 32%, and Ukrainians 16% of the city's population. That's interesting. The writings in Yiddish that remain on the walls, the Jewish hospital, and the vacant mezuzah markings on the doorposts signal a vibrant Jewish community that once was. Passing by Cafe Shutka, I noticed the Yiddish writings on the wall indicating that a Jewish tailor and shoemaker used to work there. The Jewish community was entirely wiped out during World War II. The independent state of Ukraine in 1941, Soviet occupation of Lviv, which began link, ended on June 30th, 1941, when the German army marched in. The Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, declared an independent state of Ukraine on the same day and established a new government headed by an overtly anti-Semitic campaign in support of ethnic cleansing of non-Ukrainians. Canadian Ukrainian professor John Paul Himka explains that the OUN was keen on demonstrating its loyalty to the Germans in order to win their support for a state. The new prime minister of the self-declared Ukrainian state, Stetsko, who was also an aide to Stepan Bandera, made no secret of his views of Jews as parasites and published an article on this issue in a Ukrainian newspaper in Canada. See Part 1 about Canada and ex-Nazis from Ukraine and Belarusia. Much like present-day Svoboda leader Ole Tyanybok, Stetsko saw both Moscow and the Jews as Ukraine's eternal enemies, and was in favor of introducing German methods of extermination to Ukraine. In June 1941, Stetsko sent Bandera a message in which he stated that he was preparing an armed force to protect Ukrainians and remove the Jews. In the decades after the war, Stetsko, along with many other Ukrainian Nazis, was granted a haven in the U.S. and recognized as legitimate representatives of the people of Ukraine as a whole. Stetsko was received by George H. Bush in the White House. Link. I did not see this link earlier. After thousands of political prisoners were executed by the Soviet NKVD, shortly before the retreat of the Soviet forces, Ukrainian militias forced hundreds of Jewish residents to clean city streets with knees. The Jews were blamed for being supporters of the Soviets and were made to sing pro-USSR songs. After the Jews exhumed bodies of murdered political prisoners, they were up by Germans and Ukrainians. Of an initial 2,000 Jews, 80 survived. Professor John Paul Himm provided the engine of the pogrom. Perhaps some may like to argue that the Jews should have been punished because they supported communism, but the random arrests of hundreds of random Jews and the pogrom that follow cannot possibly be justified. Furthermore, the UPA in subsequent years, even when its leaders campaign of mass murdering against Jews and Poles, Germany did not recognize the new independent state of Ukraine and arrested Stetsko and Bandera. This has led many to assume Bandera was not executed by the Germans, but was imprisoned in Berlin, then transferred to Sennhausen. Good conditions is testament to the fact that he was not seen by the Nazis as an enemy, but as a collaborator and a troublemaker. Indeed, even after his release a year later, Bandera continued to collaborate with the Nazis. Furthermore, actions taken by the OUN and UPA against the Germans were very small in scale. Historian Per Rudling clarifies that 50% of the UPA leaders had a background as collaborators within the military, police, or punitive organs of the Nazi German occupants, and played roles in the implementation of the Holocaust in the occupied Soviet Union. To claim that Bandera and the UPA fighters against the Germans, however, is simply not true. At the same time, it is also incorrect to paint all Ukrainians as Nazi collaborators. The UPA had between 19,000 to 22,000 soldiers, while millions of Ukrainians joined the Red Army. The UPA, whose flags are adopted by present-day Svoboda and Right Sector, adhered to a racist policy of Ukraine for Ukrainians and sought to ethnically cleanse the area under their control. According to historian Per Rudling, at least 58 pogroms took place in western Ukraine, with the number of the dead between 13,000 and 35,000. UPA soldiers testify that orders to murder Poles often overlapped with those to murder surviving Jews, something that was reflected in the military songs of the UPA. Professor John Paul Himka, in his article The Ukrainian Insurgent Army and the Holocaust, writes that in early 1944, a group of 376 Jews in Radyaviliv, who worked for the Banderas, were gradually killed by Bandera's followers, and 34 survived. In forests near Ozeriani and Kupyachiv, followers of Bandera murdered all 70 Jews who worked at the labor camp. A commander killed the last Jewish woman, Chernoplessy, although she claimed she had nursed him when she was a child. Ostelnyowyeki Forest on 1944, a survivor named Moshe Maltz wrote that When the Bandera gang sees a Jew, they consider it a prize catch. They literally slash Jews to pieces with their machetes. In winter of 1943 through 94, OUN and UPA tried to win the support of the Western Allies and portrayed themselves as more tolerant, yet their killing of Jews intensified during this period. A survivor in 3, the Banderowiczy began to kill the Poles, who were living in liberty, that the Banderowiczy had announced that they will not kill the Jews because they are fighting against a common enemy. We went to Brzezinka. In fact, there were 200 Jews living at liberty, working for the peasants as tanners, tailors, cobblers, and the like. The houses of the Poles stood empty. Then the Banderowiczy announced that England and America, as countries with which they were allied, had forbidden them to kill Jews, that they will not allow Jews to take over the homes abandoned by the Poles. In December 1943, the Banderowiczy began to register the Jews. After registration, they announced that if one Jew escaped, the rest would be killed. In December 1943, a certain Jew knocked on our window pane and shouted, "Run for it! The Banderowiczy have killed the Antonowka Jews." We fled to the forest. We sent the forester to investigate. He came back with the news that the Banderowiczy had killed all the Jews with axes and knives. There are abundant testimonies of mass killings of Jews by the UPA as the Red Army approached. I know, free email if I just do something weird. A OUN-UPA report from 1943 makes it clear that the UPA was not a freedom movement, but a genocidal organization that was inherently anti-Semitic and racist. A report stated that the Jews, almost completely liquidated in small groups or as individuals, hide in the woods and wait for a change in the political situation. We ourselves liquidated in the Horin region 7 Jewish men and a Jewish woman. A pamphlet by UPA in August 1943 stated, "The eternal enemy of Ukraine, Moscow, sends for the destruction of the Ukrainian nation bands of gypsies, Muscovites, Jews, and other rabble, the so-called Red Partisans." Mikhailo Smenchak, a Ukrainian nationalist who fought in the ranks of the UPA and OUN, wrote when referring to the Jews that we consider them agents of Muscovite imperialism, formerly Tsarist but now proletarian. Still, we have to first beat the Muscovites and then the surviving Jews. Some claim that Jews served in the UPA and that therefore it was a liberation movement. John Paul Himka clarifies, however, that Jews were forced to serve in the UPA as doctors and did so only that they could survive. Rumors that many Jews served in the UPA voluntarily are not supported by evidence, and very few Jewish doctors survived their service. A small number of Jews were rescued in isolated cases by UPA fighters, but these were due to personal circumstances and not due to a political motivation. In light of these facts, it is tragic that some Jews today identify themselves with the UPA or whitewash the crimes of Bandera's followers. The Banderas used to torture their victims, hunted Jews in the woods, and often lured them out of their hiding places by pretending to be partisans. According to Rudling, Jewish survivors in Western Ukraine typically emphasize that with 98.5% of the Volhynian Jews murdered, there were few places in Europe where the Holocaust was so brutally thorough, and had it not been for the Banderites, more Jews would have survived. While the murder of Jews by the UPA continued, even after the Soviet occupation in 1945, the Soviet authorities were shamed by the large number of locals who collaborated with the Nazis and were interested in laying the blame mostly on Germany, the hope of receiving financial compensation for the immense damage and loss. For this reason, many of the perpetrators evaded justice to Worse, some of the perpetrators were later supported by the United States. The Azov Battalion, that was part of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalist faction led by Bandera OUNB, engaged in atrocities against Jews in Venetia, I guess, while some of its soldiers participated in the Lviv pogrom. The battalion was supported by the CIA after World War II. Link and its members were parachuted into the area to fight against the Russians. The Ukrainian lobby, which contained many former Nazis, was well established in the U.S. with the support of various Republican administrations, according to Paul H. Rosenberg. How did Ukraine chose to commemorate and make sense of the atrocities that took place by the OUN, the UPA, and the Holocaust, a study in the manufacturing of historical myths, explains that in as early as 1943, the OUN engaged in historical revision and blamed the killing on Germans and Poles. The UPA went as far as to fabricate evidence after it was apparent that the Germans were losing the war. Indeed, by 1947, the UPA denied it was ever anti-Semitic or that it took part in actions against Jews. One OUN leader said that Ukrainians suffered from the actions of the Germans more than the Jews. However, OUN and UPA leaders were not executed by the Nazis, but eventually released, while Jews were subject to a different fate. According to Rudling, after the election of Viktor Yushchenko, supported by the West during the Orange Revolution, Ukrainian historians presented the UPA and OUN as groups that included Jews and rescued Jews during the Holocaust. However, 48% of the UPA commanders, at the minimum, collaborated in various ways with the Germans. 2010, Stepan Bandera was given the title Hero of Ukraine by the Ukrainian government. In Lviv, we saw the larger-than-life monument to Stepan Bandera with a black and red flag of the Ukrainian insurgent army on its side, along with a bouquet of white and yellow flowers, the colors of the Ukrainian flag. Want to pause here because that mention of the black and red flag. Some of you might remember a certain punk rock group, a feminist punk rock group, I guess called Pussy Riot, had shown up at the Olympics and tried to do one of their little things, and a bunch of guards came along and actually had whips. I immediately recognized what this was. That's not a Russian thing. That's uniquely ethnically Ukrainian. And they had red and black flags on their security uniforms. But you won't find anybody who will say they're Ukrainian. All hear that a bunch of Russian security guards attacked Pussy Riot. Just show up, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no. Oh, guys, we're out of here. Reporters everywhere to make sure it all was on camera. Very convenient. Shortly after that, the attempt at the Russian Moscow Maidan, Ukrainians were established in places where Jewish ghettos once stood, and in Babi Yar. In the Zolochiv prison in Lviv, a memorial was erected murdered by the end, but not the murder of Jews during the Lviv pogrom. Professor Himka wrote that what the Ukrainians needed was not dialogue, but self-examination. The Ukrainians were responsible for everything in the Holocaust, while Russians and Jews were responsible for all Soviet crimes. Such attitudes pointed to mental and moral decrepitude. However, it should be noted in Lviv, support for the UPA was obvious. Red and black flags were hanging in various stores and restaurants, even in a Jewish restaurant owned by a family. At the Lviv State University, a massive red and black poster adorned with nationalist slogans. I heard from a local friend that the university has many student activists who receive student credit for taking part in demonstrations in Maidan, and that they were now busy with student activism for the war. Peaceful protest. In fact, in April 2014, some in Lviv paid tribute to the 1st Galician Division, which was part of the SS. Link in a march in honor of the division. Participants begun their march at the Bandera monument and ended it at a memorial for Galician soldiers. During my visit, I explored the Jewish quarter of the city, and I saw the remains of an old synagogue, the Golden Rose, while a Jewish-themed restaurant owned by a Ukrainian family was established next to it. Various pictures of Jewish life in the area are hung in the restaurant. Prices are not set at the restaurant, but one must bargain for them in the supposedly Jewish way. Youch, dude! Based. Small red and black flags of the same Ukrainian insurgent army whose people murdered the local Jewish community are placed on the bar, and a large charity box allows visitors to put in money for Ukrainian soldiers fighting in the Donbass, many of whom share the Nazi ideology. As I continued to wander the city, more and more troubling signs emerged. Various stores were selling red and black flags. T-shirts depicting Stepan Bandera as a hero and Vladimir Putin as Hitler were also sold. Fascist graffiti of red and black depicting Hitler's famous words, "God is with us," appeared not to disturb various passers-by. A floor mat depicting Putin's face alongside EU and Ukrainian flags was sold in a different store, while in yet another, a major sign advertised recruitment to the ultra-fascist right sector. In an open market downtown, various scarves depicting Bandera were sold, along with toilet paper with the face of Putin and others. That's, wow. All right. That's creative. All right. That one I was not expecting. I rushed to take a few pictures, but did not want to attract much attention. Luckily, there were not many people in the area, as the market was closing due to the snow, and I managed to take various pictures. A stranger gave me an ominous look, so I walked away from the area. In the morning, the snow was already piled high. When we made our way to the car, driving back to the border, we passed by vacant lands covered in snow, and I could not help but think of the many Jewish communities that once lived in the area, and how those who engaged in the ethnic cleansing and murder of neighboring Poles are glorified in the present. Lviv is a beautiful city, but for me personally, it signals more of its absence than of what it is today. The memorial for the Jewish ghetto of Lviv was built mostly by private donations from Jewish foundations. The existence of multiple UPA flags in the city means that few have come to regret the ethnic cleansing of Poles and the mass murder of Jews and Poles. Furthermore, the current mayor pays a monthly salary of 1,000 hryvnia to former fighters of the OUN. The fact that neo-Nazis now form part of army units sent to fight in East Ukraine, and that Ukraine has been experiencing a wave of extreme nationalism as marches have recently been held in Kiev, marking the 106th birthday of Bandera, means it may be difficult to place the demons unleashed by the U.S. back into the battle. Ukrainian fascism is still very much alive, with even Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, there we go, referring to the population in East Ukraine as subhumans. After making Poland the next day, saw carriers transporting modern tanks as the U.S. continues to support Ukrainian fascists and deliver links to the wider region. The demons of the past have returned. The same fascist death to them are being voiced in Kiev, with Ukrainian soldiers calling for purification of the nation. So you would think that they would be, we would have been hearing all about this. I mean, you guys are saying that, this was new to you. because of that from training or weaponry for the Azov Battalion, an independent unit that had been. Azov Battalion online propaganda shows Israeli licensed Tavor rifles in the fascist group's hands, while Israeli human rights activists have protest arms sales to Ukraine on the basis that the weapons might end up with anti-Semitic militias. In a letter about licenses for Ukraine obtained by the Electronic Intifada, the Israeli Defense Ministry Arms Export Agency says they are careful to grant licenses to arms exporters in full coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other government entities. The 26 June letter is sent in reply to Israeli lawyer Eitan Mak, who had written a detailed request demanding Israel end all military aid to the country. Azov's official status in the Ukrainian armed forces means it cannot be verified that Israeli weapons and training are not being used by anti-Semitic or neo-Nazi soldiers. And 35 other human rights activists wrote they had written that Ukrainian armed forces use rifles made in Israel and are trained by Israelis, according to reports in the country. The head of the Israeli Arms Export Agency declined to deny the reports or even discuss cancellation of weapons licenses, citing security concerns. But Rochelle Chen, the head of the agency, confirmed to Mac that she had carefully read your letter, which detailed the fascist nature of Azov and the reports of Israeli arms and training. Both the Defense Ministry letter and Mac's original request can be read in the original Hebrew below. The fact that Israeli arms are going to Ukrainian neo-Nazis is supported by Azov's own online propaganda. On its YouTube channel, Azov posted a video review of locally produced copies of 2 Israeli Tavor rifles seen in this video. A photo on Azov's website also shows a Tavor in the hands of one of the militia's officers. The rifles are produced under license from Israeli weapon industries and as such would have been authorized by the Israeli government. IWI markets the Tavor as the primary weapon of the Israeli special forces. It has been used in recent massacres of unarmed Palestinians taking part in Great March of Return protests in Gaza. Now, just want to do a quick scan. Oh, this is interesting because I had read from this man's article earlier. As journalist, Max Blumenthal explained on The Real News in February, Beletsky has pledged to restore the honor of the white race and has advanced laws forbidding race mixing. According to the Telegram, Beletsky in 2014 wrote that the historic mission of our nation in this critical moment is led the white races of the world in a final crusade for their survival, a crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen, as I had said before. So now it's mostly quoting things I had already read. So this is also a throwback to the end of the Cold War, when the CIA supported fascists and Hitlerites to infiltrate from Austria into Hungary in 1956, where they began slaughtering Hungarian communist Jews and Hungarian Jews as communists. Recent postings on Azov websites document a June meeting with the Canadian military attaché, Colonel Brian Irwin. According to Azov, the Canadians concluded the briefings by expressing their hopes for further fruitful cooperation. Irwin acknowledged the receipt of an email from the Electronic Intifada, but did not answer questions about his meeting with the fascist militia. They said Canada is strongly opposed to the glorification of Nazism and all forms of racism, but that every country must come to grips with difficult periods in the past. Let's see. Oh, okay. A spokesperson for the Canadian Defense Department later sent a statement claiming that their training of Ukrainian armed forces through Operation Unifier incorporates strong human rights elements. Also a part of Colonel Irwin's meeting was the head of Azov's Officer Training Academy, Link, an institution named after right-wing Ukrainian nationalist Yevhen Konovalets. Konovalets is one of the group's idols, whose portrait frequently adorns its military iconography. Konovalets was the founder of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, which later allied itself to Nazi Germany during its invasion of the Soviet Union. OUN took part in the notorious 1941 Lviv massacre when Nazis invaded Soviet territory. Canada is, of course, not the only NATO ally to be sending arms to Ukraine. As Max Blumenthal has extensively reported, linked U.S. weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades, again, and training have been provided. This went on for 3 straight years before Democratic lawmaker Ro Khanna and others pushed it through earlier this year. Under pressure from the Pentagon, a clause in the annually renewed defense bill banning U.S. aid to Ukraine from going to the Azov Battalion was repeatedly stripped out. For his trouble, Khanna was smeared in Washington as a K Street sellout who was holding Putin's dirty laundry link. Despite the ban finally passing, Azov's status as an official unit of the Ukrainian armed forces leaves it unclear how U.S. aid can be separated out. In 2014, the Israeli lobby groups ADL and Simon Wiesenthal Center refused to help a previous attempt to bar U.S. aid to neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. ADL argued that the focus should be on Russia, while the Wiesenthal Center pointed to the fact that other far-right leaders had met at the Israeli embassy in Ukraine, as if that somehow absolved their anti-Semitic views. Attempts by some in Congress to bar U.S. military aid to Nazis in Ukraine may explain military aid from Israel. Israel's deepening military technical cooperation with Ukraine and its fascist militias is likely a way to help its partner in the White House, and is another facet of the growing Zionist white supremacist alliance, LINK. Haven't seen that one yet. All right. We get to January 4th, 2018, where people are writing about this in, well, this is interesting by the end of it, is Bandera rebrand. Ukrainian police declare admiration for Nazi collaborators to make a point. February 11th, 2019 by Christopher Miller for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I am going to be putting all the links for this down below so that there is a good, solid historical record of how this seems to be this huge story that nobody has any idea Paul Ryan was involved in, the Bush family was involved in, that for some reason, some aspect of the Israeli government is involved in, and then all the way to today. Ukrainian nationalists, 1st of January, 20 aware of how Joe Biden himself said that he's visited Kiev, what did he say, 14 or so times? How did he not know about any of this? Is it really possible he had no idea about any of this? He had no idea that Ro Khanna had made this an issue. For history's sake, I'll be doing the nightly reading tonight. Just wanted to make sure to do this. I was going to try to do some big article or something on it. But then I was like, there's been so many articles made. Instead, it would be good to point out all of those articles that have been made. The historical background of our government being all about it. How aspects of every part of the government seem to be enablers of all of this. And that, for some reason, nobody can stop riotous communists in our streets. And it's nothing like this, right? There's no historical pattern, right? This is not happening here, right? I mean, General Milley, I mean, he's read Mao Zedong. He understands white rage. Take care, you all.